Ramadan is coming up quick, and that means hosting loads of dinner parties for friends and family. There's one dish I serve nearly every time, which is a roast leg of lamb. It feeds loads of people, has the juiciest meat, and doesn't need much active work, leaving you free to cook other things. So here's my mother-in-law's recipe that I promise will be the star of your table. There's 3 parts to this simple technique that make it so good. First, you'll marinate the meat overnight to pack in flavour and tenderize it. Then you'll prepare the meat for roasting using a special technique. And third, you'll make some incredible vegetables with the meat's juices. It all starts the day before with a big chunk of bone-in meat, and although we generally use this technique for lamb, there's nothing keeping you from using it on other meats. If you're going with lamb, you can choose between a lamb leg or a lamb shoulder. The main difference is that a lamb leg has a lot of meat so it feeds more people, but it also has less fat and isn't as juicy. Shoulders on the other hand have about 20% less meat and they're not shaped for easy carving, but all of the meat is incredibly soft and juicy. Just look how easy the bones pull out. When I have a lot of guests, I always make 2 small shoulders instead of a large leg, because it's just so much better. I'll trim and cook both of them to show you the difference, but the same techniques and measurements apply to either one. Before marinating the meat, you should clean it up or ask if your butcher can do this for you. It isn't strictly necessary, and I tend not to do it if there isn't too much fat or silver skin, but on these ones I'll trim it slightly. What I'm looking for is patches of fat that have a dry or shiny appearance or thin silvery skin. These don't soften when the meat is cooked, and so removing them helps the texture. With a sharp knife, I'm just cutting around them and then using my fingers to pull them from the muscles beneath. Oh yeah, and get rid of the stamps too, as they look ugly and taste bad. The other benefit to removing these is that it helps expose more meat so the marinade can penetrate better, but it's a balancing game as the fat helps keep the meat moist. Once you're happy with how it looks, it's time to make the tenderizing marinade, which is made from simple ingredients that you already have and a huge load of onions. Onions are key to most Middle Eastern grilled dishes as they add a ton of flavour and contain enzymes that soften meat. The more muscle is used, the tougher it gets, and so this marinade really helps for tough cuts that might otherwise be chewy like lamb's legs. When you've cut up your onions, break out a blender or food processor, then add them to it along with a good amount of garlic, some black peppercorns and a bunch of salt. That gets blended together into a paste, and to get there I usually add a few tablespoons of water to help it start blending. You can also add other spices if you want, and just blend that until the onion is well broken down, and you have a delicious looking onion milkshake. Pour yourself a tall glass and enjoy the smooth refreshing taste of pure onion juice. Delicious. To be real though, the marinade should be salty and very oniony. It's both going to infuse the meat with flavour and act as a wet brine which will help to season the meat from the inside. All you need to do now is apply the marinade to the meat. I find these strong Ziploc style bags really good for marinating. Just check that your meat fits, then add the marinade and massage it into the meat. You want it evenly coated from top to bottom, then seal the bag and remove as much air as you can. The more onion that is in contact with the meat, the better the effects of the marinade. These bags can then be placed straight in the fridge where you should let the meat marinate for at least 12 hours. 12 hours later the meat is going to look very different. Cut open the bag and then use a spatula to scrape all of the onion marinade off of the meat. This is going to burn in the oven, so get rid of as much of it as possible. Now let's take a closer look. First thing you'll notice is the colour has changed. This happens due to the meat being wet, but also partly down to the marinade penetrating into the meat. The other thing is that the meat is much softer. Even the tough tendons at the top of the leg have softened completely. If you poke it hard enough with a finger, you can actually push through the meat fibres and dent it. This is proof that the marinade has worked, and you're going to end up with a tender roast. Before we cook it though, we'll add extra flavour by studding the meat with some garlic and black peppercorns. Poke some holes into the thicker parts of the meat and fill them with slices of garlic and peppercorns in each one. You don't need to go crazy, but add enough that it feels evenly spread on the top and bottom. After that, take some nutmeg and grate a small amount over the entire lamb leg. Now set your oven to 160 degrees Celsius and then you'll wrap the meat. We're going back to a technique that my ancient Egyptian family used hundreds of generations ago. It involves mummifying the meat, but we're going to modernize it. You might see this in French or Italian cooking, but they stole it from us. This traps steam and fat inside the paper, keeping the meat moist and then allowing it to fry in its own fat later. You're going to need some flexible paper for this, so let's make some. Take a roll of parchment paper and cut 2 really long sheets that are 3 times the length of your joint of meat. Roll and crumple them up into balls, then place them in a bowl of water for about 10 seconds until they start to soften. Then unwrap them and squeeze out the excess water. What this does is make the paper soft and malleable, so they're going to act more like fabric than paper, meaning we can wrap them rather than fold them around the meat easily. It's much easier to wrap this around anything and completely seal it in like this garlic. So when you're ready, place the paper on your board and place the meat on top. Then you just get to folding the paper. You want it wrapped tightly and covering the entire length of the leg, and because this is quite thin, you should double it up with a second layer of paper. In the end, your lamb should be completely sealed, meaning there's nowhere for the steam and fat to go, so they stay in the paper. The last thing you do is place the wrapped meat snugly into a baking dish and then cover it with a tight-fitting foil lid. Place the tray into your oven and this will cook for between 4 to 6 hours. Set a timer and check it about every hour just to make sure nothing is burning. Around the 2-hour mark of cooking the meat, I take it out of the oven and deglaze any brown bits that are in the bottom of the pan to get some meat juices. Boiling water and a spatula make quick work of them, and you're left with some beautiful roast stock that is packed with flavour. On the second one I didn't even need to deglaze it. While the meat continues to cook, you'll need to prepare the roast vegetables. I always go with these 3, carrots, potatoes and shallots, but honestly any sort of good roasting vegetable can be used. Carrots should be peeled or washed to clean up the skin and then chopped into large chunks as they shrink a lot. Potatoes can be peeled and then chopped in half or into quarters. And then the shallots, I just peel them and use them whole. I lay these out into a tray and then coat them in a flavourful mixture. To make it, take a small food processor and add an onion with a little salt and black pepper, and then pour in about 100 ml of stock. The crucial part to make this flavourful is to run the blender at full speed till the stock splashes everywhere. The added torture of cleaning up the mess is scientifically proven to make the food taste better. Actually, if yours leaks like this, you're better off blending the onion first and then adding the stock in stages until it transforms into a liquid. Then you pour that mixture over the vegetables and mix them together thoroughly so they're all coated. That only needs to cook for an hour, so put them in the oven when the meat has about an hour left. Speaking of which, after the 3-hour mark you want to check the meat regularly. You don't want any liquid to burn in the trays, so if you see it get dark like this, add the remaining stock or some water to stop the liquid burning. Don't do this though if it's already burnt and black, as the flavour will seep into the meat. You can also place veg under the meat for this final stage, and I sometimes just cook it like this. I'm just doing it here as I had some leftovers, and although the liquid is quite dark, I think I caught it in time as it doesn't taste burnt. When the hour of cooking the vegetables is up, they should look something like this. If not, give them a toss and 10 minutes under the grill to brown. You can see they've really caramelised and are coated in the reduced onion and lamb mixture, which means they're packed with flavour. Now at this point it's been about 6 hours and my meat is looking ready. I can tell because first it's been in the oven forever, but second it's very soft to the touch. You can start ripping off that paper carefully. All you'll uncover is a roast lamb shoulder that looks like it's been deep fried. Sometimes it isn't as well browned, and in that case I usually put it under the grill for 5 minutes. That lamb shoulder is looking incredibly moist and is calling my name, but first let's check the leg. You'll see that this actually looks quite a bit drier than the shoulder. This is expected of leg. The small muscle off to the side has very little fat, so it can be dry no matter how you cook it, but generally under the skin it will still be quite moist. To plate this up, you just add your vegetables to a serving platter in a pile and place the meat on top. It's quite a good looking dish, and considering that these were wrapped in baking paper the entire time, they're both browned well. Now to demonstrate how soft the meat is, first I just wiggle the shoulder bone to pop it out, and then crack it to the skin to release the juicy meat. This always works great torn into chunks, so instead of slicing it, try serving it with some forks instead. Little Obi dreamt of doing this all the time, so I'm going to make my dream come true. It's just so juicy now. It might look a bit fibrous, but it's got a lot of fat in it, so you don't feel those fibers at all. And before someone calls me uncivilized, of course I'm having some vegetables too. Oh my god. Okay. Maple has been begging me for some for ages. Some lahma? You want to eat on the floor? Let's put it for you. You want some? You want some? She wants some.